You'd think being married to an artist would be all romance and creativity, right? Think again. Turns out my wife, Emily, wasn't just painting abstract faces. She was painting her affair partner. And I, the clueless husband, was proudly sharing pictures of her work with all my friends, calling her a genius of emotion. Emily and I had been married for 10 years. She was the creative one, always buried in her studio, while I worked a steady corporate job to keep us afloat. I loved that she had a passion, even if it meant long hours away from the family. She was preparing for her biggest gallery show yet, a series of abstract portraits called Facets of a Soul. She claimed the pieces were about universal emotions, a way to express what it feels like to be human. It sounded deep, maybe even pretentious, but I believed in her talent, so I didn't question it. For months, Emily spent nearly every waking hour in her studio. She started locking the door, saying she didn't want anyone, including me, to see the work until it was complete. I thought it was just her way of maintaining artistic focus. I even brought her coffee and snacks, proud of her dedication, feeling like the supportive husband. When the exhibit finally opened, I couldn't wait to see what she'd created. The gallery was buzzing, with everyone marveling at her work. The paintings were stunning, fragmented, blurred faces that seemed to shimmer with emotion. There was a recurring figure in nearly every piece, a man's face, though never fully clear. It was haunting, magnetic, and deeply personal in a way I couldn't quite put my finger on. I wanted to be proud, to share in her success. But as I walked through the exhibit, something began to gnaw at me. The faces in her paintings weren't as abstract as she'd claimed. They felt specific, like someone she'd seen often enough to memorize. It wasn't a suspicion, not yet, just a faint unease I couldn't shake. That night, lying in bed, I replayed the exhibit in my mind. Who was the man in those paintings? And why did it feel like Emily was trying to tell a story that didn't include me? After the exhibit's opening night, the unease I felt didn't fade. In fact, it only grew stronger. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those fragmented faces, sharp cheekbones, piercing eyes, a faint smirk that seemed almost mocking. The man in the paintings wasn't a blur in my mind anymore. He felt real, like a ghost haunting the edges of my thoughts. I tried brushing it off. Maybe Emily had used a reference model, someone she'd seen in a magazine or a stranger on the street. That would explain the familiarity. But then I remembered her insistence that the series was purely emotional, inspired by feelings and not specific people. If that were true, why did the same man appear in nearly every painting? Why wasn't I in any of them? I started paying closer attention to Emily's behavior. She was riding the high of her exhibit success, glowing with a newfound confidence. It was subtle at first, an extra spring in her step, a spark in her eyes when she talked about her art. She'd always been passionate about her work, but this was different. She seemed almost radiant, and yet there was a distance between us, like she was keeping part of herself hidden. I decided to revisit the exhibit alone, hoping a second look might put my mind at ease. Walking through the gallery without the distractions of opening night, I studied the paintings more closely. Details I'd missed before now stood out. In one piece, a gold necklace rested against the man's blurred chest. In another, a faint tattoo peeked out from the edge of his fragmented shoulder, a design so unique it felt like a signature. The gallery owner, a cheerful woman who adored Emily's work, approached me as I stared at the paintings. She gushed about the exhibit's reception, how people were drawn to the raw emotion in Emily's art. Then, casually, she mentioned how Emily had spent months immersing herself in the project. It's like she lived and breathed these faces, she said. Her words sent a chill down my spine. I couldn't shake the feeling that Emily's connection to this man wasn't just artistic, it was personal. Back home, I tried to push the thoughts aside, telling myself I was overreacting. But that night, something inside me shifted. As Emily slept soundly beside me, I found myself staring at her, wondering who she really was. The woman I thought I knew had poured her soul into these paintings, and I couldn't shake the feeling that her soul wasn't entirely mine anymore. I decided to trust my gut. If this man was more than a figment of her imagination, there had to be a trace of him somewhere. I just needed to find it. Once suspicion takes root, it consumes everything. What started as a quiet doubt had now grown into an obsession, and I couldn't stop myself from unraveling the threads. Emily wasn't just inspired by some vague idea of universal emotions. She was hiding something, and I was determined to find out what. The first crack appeared in the form of a small gold pendant. While tidying up our bedroom one afternoon, I noticed a jewelry box tucked in the back of Emily's closet. It wasn't unusual for her to keep her things organized, but this particular box wasn't one I'd seen before. Inside, nestled among her usual pieces, was a delicate gold necklace I didn't recognize. At first glance, it seemed ordinary, until I spotted the engraving on the back of the pendant. 2 initials, jail. The initials jolted me. They weren't mine or our kids. They didn't belong to anyone in our immediate circle. And yet, I'd seen that necklace before, on the blurred figure in her paintings. It was unmistakable. Emily had included the pendant in multiple portraits, each time with the same fragmented detail that now felt glaringly obvious. My heart raced as I pieced it together. This wasn't a random object. It was connected to someone specific. Still, I couldn't confront her. Not yet. Confrontation without proof would only push her into defensive lies. So I decided to look deeper. If jail was the key, I needed to find out who he was. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. Emily had left her laptop open on the kitchen counter one evening while she ran upstairs to take a shower. I wasn't proud of what I was about to do, but I knew I couldn't let the opportunity slip by. I opened her email, my hands trembling as I scrolled through the inbox. Most of it was mundane, gallery updates, correspondence with clients, the usual, but then I spotted it, an email thread labeled sketches. The sender was someone named James L. The subject line was innocuous enough, but the contents were anything but. The emails contained a series of photo attachments. Pictures of a man, casually posed, his face unmistakable. It was him, the same man from Emily's paintings, captured in real life. In some photos, he was smiling, leaning against a windowsill. In others, he was shirtless, his tattoo, the one I'd noticed in her work, fully visible. My stomach twisted. These weren't reference photos for an abstract project. These were intimate, personal. The timestamps on the emails dated back several months, overlapping with the time Emily had locked herself away in her studio, claiming she needed space to work. I kept scrolling, my heart pounding with every click. Their messages weren't overly romantic, but the tone was undeniable, playful, warm, laced with familiarity that didn't belong in a professional exchange. And then, buried in one of James's replies, I found the words that confirmed everything. It's incredible to see myself through your eyes. I've never felt so seen before. I closed the laptop, my hands shaking. Emily wasn't just painting him. She was painting for him. Every brushstroke, every fragmented detail. It wasn't about universal emotions or abstract concepts. It was about their connection, their shared intimacy. And she had woven her betrayal into the very fabric of her art, hiding it in plain sight for the world to admire. But that wasn't the only surprise waiting for me. The next day, while Emily was out, I decided to check her studio. She'd kept it locked for months, claiming she didn't want anyone to disturb her creative flow. But now, I needed to see what else she was hiding. I used the spare key she'd forgotten I had, stepping into the room that had become her sanctuary. It was like stepping into another world. Canvases were propped against every wall, some completed, others half-finished. Paints and brushes were scattered across the floor, and the air smelled faintly of turpentine. But what caught my eye was a small table near the window, where a stack of papers sat neatly arranged. I picked them up, my breath catching as I realized what I was holding: sketches of James. Dozens of them, in various poses and states of undress. These weren't studies for abstract portraits. They were raw, intimate, almost obsessive. Some had notes scribbled in the margins, phrases like "capture the intensity" and "the eyes must tell the story." And then there was a small notebook tucked beneath the stack. Inside, Emily had written what could only be described as a journal. Each entry detailed her thoughts as she worked on the paintings, but they also revealed something deeper. She wrote about James, about how he inspired her, how he made her feel alive in a way she hadn't felt in years. She wrote about their shared moments, their laughter, their stolen hours together. My chest tightened as I read her words. Emily hadn't just strayed physically, she'd given him a piece of her soul. And now, she'd immortalized him in her work, presenting their connection as art for the world to see. I put the papers back exactly as I'd found them, careful not to disturb the scene. Emily's betrayal wasn't just a fleeting mistake. It was deliberate, calculated. She had built an entire narrative around her affair, hiding it behind the guise of artistic expression. But now I had everything I needed. The paintings, the emails, the sketches, the journal, they all painted a damning picture. Emily thought she was in control, that her secrets were safe in her studio and her art. She had no idea that I'd uncovered everything. As I left the studio, a single thought consumed me. She wanted her art to tell a story. Fine. I'd make sure everyone knew what that story truly was. It's one thing to suspect. It's another to know. But what came next? The truth hidden in Emily's carefully constructed world was more than I could have anticipated. This wasn't just an affair. It was a narrative meticulously woven, as if she were trying to rewrite her life in broad, sweeping strokes with James as the protagonist. After leaving the studio, I didn't confront her. Confrontation would give her the power to explain, to twist, to manipulate the facts into some romanticized version of the truth. No, I needed a plan. Emily had painted her story. Now, I would rewrite the ending. Over the next week, I started examining her life through a new lens. Her routine, once mundane and predictable, now seemed rife with subtle deceptions. The art supplies she purchased weren't always for her paintings. Several receipts I found in her desk drawer were for boutique hotels, champagne deliveries, and high-end lingerie I'd never seen her wear at home. These weren't the tools of an artist. They were the tools of someone crafting a fantasy. But the most surprising discovery came from the one place I never thought to look, her public social media account. Emily had always been careful about what she shared. Photos of us, the kids, her art, and little else. But as I scrolled further back through her posts, a pattern emerged. The captions were innocuous enough, but the photos themselves told a different story. In several images, small details caught my eye. A reflection in a glass window, a shadow at the edge of the frame, or the faint outline of a man standing just outside the shot. James wasn't just the subject of her paintings. He had been present in moments I thought were ours. A romantic weekend getaway I'd planned months ago. There he was, just out of view in the background of a shot she'd taken at the resort. A seemingly mundane photo of her at an art exhibit, tagged with "so inspiring." His blurred reflection in a display case. She had inserted him into our lives like a ghost, hovering at the edges, unseen but undeniably there. It was then I realized her affair wasn't just a secret. It was a parallel reality, running alongside the life we'd built. And I hadn't been a part of that reality. I'd been the backdrop, the unwitting canvas she used to paint over her own life. The final piece of the puzzle came when I decided to dig into James himself. Emily's emails had provided his full name, and from there, it wasn't hard to track him down. He was a semi-famous figure in the art world, a curator known for his charisma and penchant for mentorship. His social media painted a picture of a man who thrived on attention. His accounts littered with photos of glamorous events, exclusive galleries, and, of course, subtle nods to Emily's work. But what caught my attention wasn't his public persona. It was a private account linked to his email, one I wouldn't have found without some digital sleuthing. The account was locked, but its bio told me everything I needed to know, living for the moments no one else gets to see. Below was a single profile photo, James, wearing the gold pendant Emily had immortalized in her paintings. This wasn't just an affair. It was a performance, and I had been cast as the unwitting fool in their private drama. But if they wanted a story, I would give them one they'd never forget. I began collecting everything. Screenshots of emails, photos from their social media accounts, receipts, and even Emily's journal entries. Every piece of evidence was organized into a timeline, a damning narrative that laid bare every lie, every betrayal. But this wasn't just for me. Emily had made her art a public spectacle, and now I would do the same. Emily's exhibit was still running, drawing in larger crowds each day. Critics were raving about her work, praising its emotional depth and the mysterious allure of the fragmented figure she'd painted. Little did they know, the mystery was about to unravel. I reached out to the gallery owner anonymously, posing as an art enthusiast who had questions about the series. I shared a selection of photos. Emily's painting side by side with James's real-life images, his tattoo, and the gold pendant. I framed it as an observation, hinting that the art wasn't as abstract as it seemed. I left just enough breadcrumbs to spark curiosity, knowing the art world thrives on gossip and intrigue. By the time Emily left for the gallery that evening, the whispers had already started. The gallery owner, eager to protect her reputation, had shared my findings with a select group of critics. They were fascinated, not by the art itself, but by the scandal it represented. Who was the man? What did he mean to the artist? Why had she painted him with such intimacy? Emily had spent months crafting a narrative she thought was hers to control. But now, the story was slipping out of her hands, becoming something bigger, something she couldn't contain. She thought she was the storyteller, but she didn't realize she was the subject. And as the night wore on, I sat at home, waiting for the fallout. Emily's life wasn't just a double life anymore. It was about to become a spectacle for everyone to see. Revenge, I realized, isn't about anger, it's about precision. Emily had turned her betrayal into a form of art, each brushstroke carefully chosen to keep her secrets hidden. But she'd overlooked one critical detail. The man she betrayed wasn't the passive background character she'd assumed. She had underestimated me, and I was about to show her what real storytelling looked like. The whispers about her exhibit were growing. Critics and art enthusiasts were starting to wonder, who was the man in her paintings? What was the story behind the raw intimacy in her work? Emily was oblivious to the storm brewing beneath her feet, still basking in the glow of her perceived success. She didn't realize the audience she'd cultivated was about to witness her downfall. My plan had to be as meticulous as the life Emily had constructed. It wasn't enough to expose her affair. It had to be poetic. She had poured her heart into those paintings, immortalizing James as the center of her creative universe. Now, I would make sure her art became her undoing. The first step was simple: leverage the intrigue surrounding her work. I anonymously contacted a prominent art blogger known for exposing the hidden stories behind high-profile exhibits. I sent them a detailed dossier, photos of Emily's paintings alongside the images of James, complete with timestamps and captions that revealed their connection. I framed it as a discovery, a revelation that added new layers to her work. The blogger, hungry for clicks and controversy, took the bait without hesitation. Within days, the blog post went viral. It praised Emily's technical skill, but delved deep into the personal implications of her work. "Is this art or a confession?" the article asked, juxtaposing her professional persona with the romantic undertones of her pieces. It didn't outright accuse her of an affair, but it left enough breadcrumbs for readers to speculate. Next, I targeted the gallery itself. I reached out to a few prominent patrons who had purchased Emily's paintings. In a carefully worded email, I presented the real story behind the art, painting Emily as a genius, but one whose work wasn't inspired by universal emotions, as she claimed, but by a very specific relationship. I attached the same evidence I'd sent the blogger, ensuring the collectors couldn't ignore the scandal brewing around their prized acquisitions. Meanwhile, I worked on the final, most personal piece of the puzzle: Emily's inner circle. Her friends, her family, even the acquaintances who'd been supporting her rise in the art world. I made sure they received the truth before Emily could spin her own version. A curated package of evidence, delivered anonymously, left no room for denial. It wasn't just an affair. It was a betrayal of everyone who had trusted her. But I didn't stop there. Emily had made James the muse of her art, so I decided to make him a part of the story too. I found his professional profile online and sent him an email, polite, almost congratulatory, outlining everything I knew. I let him know that his role in Emily's life wasn't a secret anymore, that the world was starting to connect the dots between the art and the artist. I wanted him to feel the weight of exposure, the same vulnerability Emily had forced upon me. Finally, I prepared for the crescendo. the closing night of Emily's exhibit. The gallery had planned a grand event, inviting collectors, critics, and high-profile attendees to celebrate the success of her series. Emily was ecstatic, buzzing with excitement as she finalized her speech and outfit. She had no idea that the stage she was stepping onto wasn't for applause. It was for a reckoning. As I watched her prepare, I felt a strange calm wash over me. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about balance. Emily had built her life on lies, but the truth had a way of demanding justice. She thought she was the artist, the storyteller. But I was the one holding the brush now. The stage was set. The audience was ready. All that was left was to unveil the masterpiece. The night of the closing gala had finally arrived. Emily, radiant and confident, floated through the house, rehearsing her speech and fussing over her dress. She was the image of success, the celebrated artist whose work had captivated critics and collectors alike. But beneath that veneer of triumph, she had no idea the ground beneath her carefully constructed world was about to collapse. I dressed in my best suit and accompanied her to the gallery, playing the role of the proud, doting husband one last time. Emily greeted everyone with charm and grace, basking in their admiration. The room buzzed with excitement. Collectors were eager to secure the last few pieces of her series, and journalists swarmed to get interviews with the rising star. It was exactly the kind of night she had dreamed of, and I was about to turn it into a nightmare. As the evening progressed, I waited for the perfect moment. Emily stepped onto the small stage at the center of the gallery, her paintings forming a vibrant backdrop. She began her speech, thanking everyone for their support, her voice steady and filled with emotion. She spoke about the inspiration behind her work, about how art allowed her to channel universal emotions and connect with the human experience. She was in her element, completely unaware of what was coming. The murmurs started just as she was finishing her speech. Subtle at first, like ripples across a still pond. Then they grew louder, spreading through the crowd like wildfire. People were staring at their phones, whispering to one another, their eyes darting between the screens and the paintings on the walls. Emily faltered, her confident smile slipping as she noticed the shift in the room's energy. The first bombshell had dropped. The blog post about the true inspiration behind her series had been updated that very evening, complete with new evidence. Photos of James, screenshots of their emails, the sketches from her studio. The caption read, "An artist's affair, the true face behind the canvas." The timing was no accident. I'd arranged for the update to go live just as she began her speech, ensuring that everyone in the room would see it in real time. Collectors, critics, and even her closest friends. All of them now had front-row seats to the unraveling of her lies. But I wasn't done. As Emily stepped off the stage, visibly shaken, the gallery's curator, a woman who had championed Emily's work from the start, approached her. The curator held her phone in one hand and a strained expression on her face. Their hushed conversation was brief, but the panic in Emily's eyes told me everything I needed to know. She had realized the scope of the damage. The second wave hit moments later. A projector in the gallery, originally intended to display a behind-the-scenes look at Emily's creative process, suddenly flickered to life. But instead of promotional footage, it displayed a side-by-side comparison of her paintings and the photos of James. His face, his tattoo, the gold pendant. They were all there, unmistakably mirrored in her work. The caption below read, "Art or confession?" The crowd erupted. Gasps, laughter, and sharp whispers filled the room as Emily stood frozen, her carefully curated world crumbling before her eyes. She tried to speak, to explain, but the weight of the evidence was too much. People she had charmed for years now looked at her with a mix of shock and betrayal. James, who had been lurking at the edge of the event, tried to slip away unnoticed. But I had anticipated that, too. One of the attendees, an art blogger I'd tipped off, cornered him with questions about his relationship with Emily. Cameras flashed, capturing his stunned expression as he stammered through half-hearted denials. The final blow came when Emily's biggest collector, a wealthy philanthropist who had purchased half the series, demanded an explanation. When she couldn't provide one, he stormed out, vowing to pull his funding for her future projects. The dominoes fell faster than even I had expected. By the end of the night, Emily's reputation as an artist was in shreds, her career reduced to a scandalous footnote. And me? I left the gallery quietly, slipping out as the chaos unfolded. I didn't need to see the aftermath. I had orchestrated it. Emily had built her success on lies, and now she would have to face the world she had deceived. Back at home, I packed my bags. I left a note on the kitchen counter, brief and to the point. You painted your truth, and I painted mine. Goodbye, Emily. By the time she returned, the locks had been changed, her belongings packed neatly in boxes waiting on the porch. Her affair had taken everything from me, trust, love, and the life we'd built together. Now it had taken everything from her, too. Emily wanted her art to tell a story, and it did. But in the end, the story wasn't hers to control. It was mine.